Conor McReynolds, and welcome to The Dinner Party. In this podcast, I ask guests to tell me about their dream dinner parties. We hear all about the venue, the menu, and the guest list. I want to find out who these guests are and why they're the lucky recipient of an invitation to this exclusive event. This week, I am thrilled to be joined by filmmaker, comedian, and writer Daniel Nils Roberts. Daniel's genuinely one of my favourite comedians. As a stand-up, his writing is exceptional. And as an improviser, he works with some of the top comedians in the country as part of the hit improv troupe Austentatious. I can't wait to chat to Daniel all about his brilliant work and, of course, about his dream dinner party. So, let's dive in. Here is the brilliant Daniel Nils Roberts. Daniel Nils Roberts, hello, and thank you so much for joining me on the dinner party.
Hello, Connor. Thanks for having me.
Oh, how are you, mate?
I am very good. Yeah, I'm currently holed up by the banks of a fjord in Norway, so it could be worse, couldn't it?
That is dreamy. That is positively dreamy. How's Norway kind of been dealing with the last few months?
Um,
I,
well, it's mostly been a lot calmer and a lot more kind of relaxed than Britain, which I hope is with scientific foundation. They've seemed very blasé. Could just be it was really gung ho, and I took that for kind of knowing what they were doing.
I mean, obviously, like when you look at this sort of rankings for global happiness and equality and democracy and all that stuff, I mean, Norway's always like a kind of a top three country. Has that been your experience of Norway over the last few months?
I mean, it's an interesting one, those rankings, because they are kind of paired with this idea of what Norwegians are personality-wise, which is quite insular and not particularly jolly people, which there is something in. So I think there's this disparity maybe between the reality of how Norwegians would kind of gauge their happiness versus how they show their happiness.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, nobody used to write about sort of Scandinavian, ways of being, but
Yeah.
yeah, I
You've
think
you've made some brilliant films on sort of the issues that kind of touch on that. There was one, and forgive me, I can't remember the Norwegian word for the sort of kind of almost the unofficial code of conduct. Could you remind me what that word is?
yeah, Janteloven or the Jante Law. So this was a short film for the BBC Online that I directed. Yeah, so that's something you kind of observe here. It's this unofficial law that sort of binds society, and um, the people in favour of it would say that what it does is stops you from having a high opinion of yourself, or from boasting, or from
Yeah.
you deserve more than other people, and therefore it helps to kind of sustain the equal social democracy that Scandinavian countries have. The detractors would say that it stops you from um, achieving much, or entrepreneurial vision and things like that. So, but it's this fascinating story
Interesting.
that was all based on this novel that someone wrote about 100 years ago, and this Danish author, and he made up this fictitious town with all these bitter citizens who kept each other down, and he wrote arguments effectively. But from that kind of fictitious beginning, they've become something that everyone in Scandinavia knows about and sort of tacitly follows. So it's a really interesting example of a kind of social law that was started in fiction.
It's quite incredible. I mean, where do you stand on it? Do you observe it, or kind of is it tangible in your experience in Norway? And if so, what is your take on it? Are you kind of more on the side of it? It's a good, positive thing that keeps everybody in check, or do you want to see a few people break those rules and kind of break out a little bit more?
Um, I mean, I feel instinctively very positive about it, because I think Norway does have a much more equal society. When you go to Norwegian towns, you don't see a kind of divide between sort of you don't see visible poverty in Norway, particularly unless you're in
Hmm.
certain areas of Oslo, maybe. Um, and I think that idea of not being kind of crassly arrogant or seizing your opportunity at the expense of other people doesn't really appeal to me. I think the Norwegian idea,
Mm.
I suppose, of working together and building a good society um, feels quite noble. And I think probably, you could argue that that's particularly important and tested at a time like this with COVID, couldn't you? Because
Absolutely, yeah.
those sorts of values in people. Um, I probably should, as someone who's kind of pursued creative vocations, I should be saying that we're allowed to kind of seize the day. But I think loads of creative things come out of Norway. I don't think it's an issue. But it's definitely
Yeah.
starting to kind of die down a little bit, that the Yentaloy, it's starting to change, and
Oh, so is it more of a kind of a generational shift?
yes, I think so, and probably influenced by how much culture they take in from overseas. But examples
Sure.
of it would be that kind of the royal family used to just kind of walk around town and live in a normal house, and no one would have a big fancy sports car because their neighbours would think they were kind of up themselves. But
Mm.
all those things are starting to shift a little bit, I think.
Interesting. Really interesting. It sounds like a really fascinating kind of different culture. Obviously, I mean, I know that you've got family in Norway, and I believe your wife is Norwegian. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So I'm actually a quarter Norwegian,
I see. Right.
and my parents moved over kind of when I was after I left home. So I never grew up in Norway. But yeah, I'm married to a Norwegian as well. So I suppose that's
Yeah,
a bit of an
but I
insight.
guess culturally, you have that sort of uh, baseline knowledge before you went over. You're familiar with aspects of the culture and that kind of thing. But having lived most of your life in the UK, it sounds like a really interesting change. How have you been adjusting to it?
Um, well, I think so. I kind of went over to Norway actually after school and before I went to university because I had this sort of family background here.
Mm.
I wasn't sure what to do. I thought maybe I'll take a gap year, and I was kind of panicking and hadn't made any choices and was just sort of hiding in bed. And so my mum decided to sign me up for this thing called a folk high school, is sort of the translation, which is something
Oh,
they have all across Scandinavia. And they're kind of um, you kind of live on this campus, and you do a kind of creative subject, and it's ungraded, and you just spend a year doing this. And a lot of people in Scandinavia do it, I suppose, either to um, work out what they really want to do, or to get something creative out of their system, or just to make friends. So I kind of was put on this boat from Newcastle, and that's where it used to go from over to Norway, faced with this strange kind of um,
wow.
strange experience ahead of me. And I was terrified because I hadn't actually been to Norway. I'd been 3 times or something, and you say I had a kind of bit of a kind of intuition over what to expect, but I didn't really. But then what was quite
Right.
nice was just to get there and discover, oh, all these people are, are pretty much the same as me. And they kind of all spoke amazing English. They liked the kind of music and films and stuff I liked more than the people I'd been at school with in Britain and everything. So
Oh yeah.
this amazing experience. But I was signed up. Um, Basically, what my mum had found was this thing called the Winston Churchill Scholarship,
Oh
and
yeah.
you could apply as a British person to one of these folk high schools, of which there are kind of, I don't know, 1,000 across Scandinavia or something.
Mhm.
And you could apply to go for free. You'd get this scholarship because Britain had freed Norway in the war. So they thought,
Oh wow.
to to reward Britain, we'll name a scholarship after Winston Churchill, and they can come to folk high school. Um,
What a
but the
thing to reap the benefits of, Daniel.
Yeah, I know I did quite well there. But the terms of it were that you couldn't choose where you were going, and you couldn't choose what you
Oh.
study. So um, I was just shipped off to. Well, weirdly, the reason my mum chose this was because she'd gone to one near Bergen in Norway when she was that age, uh,
Yeah.
and just by complete chance, I was sent to the exact same one out of hundreds in Norway. So that was
No
already
way.
eerie. But the subject that I was assigned was another Norwegian concept that you might see in the sort of lifestyle magazines, which is friluftsliv, which means the sort of outdoor air life.
It sounds wonderful.
Well, to you, Connor, it does, but to me, the thought of freelessly was a bit of a nightmare. It was sort of hiking and fishing, and we went
Oh,
mackerel
wow.
fishing, and I had to sort of dangle my line over the edge of the boat, pretending I was doing it because I just couldn't face the thought of killing anything. Um,
Oh.
that night, as we sort of slept in tents next to the mackerel-infested waters, I decided I had to get out. So I swapped. I was able to swap for art, so I spent a year painting instead.
Oh my goodness. To
Sorry.
this day, are you kind of averse to mackerel?
Oh no, I'm happy to eat them. I just don't want to kill them. I'm one of those
That
one of
seems
those
reasonable.
hypocrites.
And so the idea of these places kind of being that you go and you kind of think about, or I guess it sounds like you sort of contemplate your creativity in a place like that. You studied art. Obviously, now your career is in comedy and in filmmaking. Is that where that kind of creativity was really nurtured, or was that something that you always knew you wanted to do even before then?
Um, I would say probably before then. I think all throughout school, what I loved was, writing stuff in English and art and theatre and things like that. So
Mm,
I think I had, um, yeah, I had a kind of interest across the arts probably without really knowing what direction I wanted that to go in. I think I probably wanted to be an actor, but was too scared by the thought of auditioning for anything.
interesting. So, what did you? I mean, what were your studies at uni and that kind of thing? What was your path into eventually finding comedy and acting and filmmaking and all the wonderful things that you now do?
Well, I studied English literature because I think I just took the sort of defiant attitude of I'm not going to choose a subject because of a job I want. I've always had that
Oh
sense.
yeah.
I never want to be doing a thing purely for money or for
Mm.
professional reasons. I want to be doing the thing I want to be doing or pursuing dreams. I think I kind of,
Mm.
because my dad ended up working in the oil industry despite never really wanting to. I think that made a
Right.
impression on me, and I've kind of spent a lifetime trying to fight being dragged into the sort of corporate swell.
Well, you've been massively successful in that endeavor because, to the best of my knowledge, you've never spent a day working in the oil industry.
Yeah, let me think. I mean, I did once make a sort of corporate video for my dad's oil company.
Well, there we go. I stand corrected. You corporate whore, Daniel.
He tried to try. He probably didn't want to, but trying to drag me in without knowing. That's a good point. I'll have to be positive about that. I genuinely haven't properly worked a day in the oil industry. So what a vast success.
Yes. I mean, obviously, having studied English literature, I guess that's as good a grounding as any for one of the biggest things that you've been a part of, which is, of course, the wonderful improv group Austentatious. I mean, it's just one of the best, if not the best, improv group currently in the UK. Phenomenally successful, hugely funny shows with some of the top improvisers in the country. I mean, talk to me a bit about how you became involved with the group because they were already established before you joined. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, basically, when I was studying English, I wanted to get involved in some comedy, and I thought my mum kept saying I should audition for the Oxford Review because she'd heard of them because of I don't know,
Yes.
Michael Palin or something. I thought, oh, I'd better do that. But then someone gave me a leaflet for this other thing, the Oxford Imps, which was improvised comedy.
Yes.
But the auditions were on the same day, so I thought I'll go to the Imps first, and then I'll go to the review afterwards. But of course, the Imps took hours, and I review one. But yeah, I got into this improv comedy student group, and several of the members of Austentatious were in that group with me. So we were sort of part of similar generations there. So I
Mm.
formed with a few of them. Um, but then after university, I I was already together with my now wife, who is Norwegian, and so I said because she'd come what did I say? I think I said, because I've been away for 3 years in England, I'll come back and live with you. So I went back to Bergen for a couple of years to live with her while she finished her
Mm.
studies. And in the meantime, Austentatious was formed over in Britain by the core of it made up of these people I'd been improvising with. So I think I was on their kind of radar. Um,
Yeah.
done several shows with them before, both sketch shows and improv. And then when things started going really well for them, they realised they needed to expand a bit. And first they took on a brilliant improviser called Charlotte Gittins, and then myself as well.
Wonderful. And I just loved the Ostentatious shows that I've seen live. The Radio 4 special was just absolutely fantastic as well. I mean, how has that experience been? And I'm assuming it's just, if nothing else, you're obviously such a wonderful performer and a quick thinker. You know, that training in the Oxford Imps really sets up performers so well to sharpen that skill set. And certainly it's something I see in you. But when you're performing with, you know, some of the top comedy talent in the country, people like Carrie Ad Lloyd and Rachel Parris, Andrew Hunter Murray, Graham Dixon, all these wonderful people, do you get better at what you do the more you perform with those guys?
100%. I think I've learned so much just from kind of observing from the wings what other people are doing and thinking, oh,
Mm.
I should try that. So sometimes I'll find myself in shows in a sudden situation. You're constantly thinking on the spot, but there'll be a moment where I'll think like, I'll try that thing that I see them do sometimes. And by that I don't mean a line, or I don't mean there's no
Sure.
possibility of shoehorning anything kind of um, pre-constructed in, but more just a kind of mode of operating, I suppose. The way that you
Yeah.
choose to react to something. So I feel like I've learned a massive amount and always keep learning. Yeah.
It's it's such a skill set. I mean, improv is something that I admire just so hugely. Doing stand up, I feel comparatively cowardly. I just sort of think like I write everything down and then try to make it seem like I'm just thinking about it. But that is, I mean, just I think that maybe perhaps people don't fully appreciate sometimes that it is completely made up on the night. You know, do a lot of people make assumptions that, oh, this must be written or a structure must be in place there?
They almost
Um,
always do, yeah. It's it's a real challenge to try and drum it in. You'll be met by a sort of elderly couple, say, after a show, and they'll be like, so how many shows do you have then that you kind of, you know, swap between or something like? No, no, it's just
sure, yeah.
they're like, oh, but it's the same characters then. You're like, no, no, and they'll sort of go off, kind of winking at you as if to say, like, we know you're not really. Yeah, they often can't accept it. I mean, what I think is very difficult once you are an improviser is um, to sort of get your head around what the implications are of what they're saying is absurd, because the idea that you would somehow write a structure and have set jokes and set characters and yet be able to kind of make that loose enough to shoehorn in the suggestions that they've given, and um,
Hmm.
elements of it be fresh on. You'd be carrying so much in your head, it would be impossible. The whole
Yes.
point of improv is that you are able to kind of, it's essentially comedy mindfulness. You have to, at its best, you've kind of cleared away all of the noise and all of your voices in your head telling you to, think about other things, and you're just living in that moment and responding in that moment. And there's always an element of kind of, you have to also be a script writer in your head. You have to think 3 screens ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, particularly in our show where it is this story, you have to think, okay, so that character's met that one, and there seems to be a spark, but we can't get them together yet. We have to throw some obstacles in their path, and that character seems a bit villainous. Maybe I can say something that'll imply a past for them, or there is this constant
Yeah.
commentary. But ultimately, once you're faced with another performer there on stage, you just have to let it all go and kind of, yeah, do the comedy mindfulness.
That's a really fascinating way of thinking of it. I've never heard anybody phrase it quite like that before. And particularly that idea that you are writing as you go. I mean, it's not just a simple case of saying words, that you are thinking about structure and character and all the things as well, that all the kind of crucial elements that make up a typical Austen story as well. I mean, how familiar do you have to make yourself with the style of Jane Austen, and how much do you kind of find yourself having to constantly revise and revisit the source material to make sure that what you're doing is authentically in that style and that kind of thing? It sounds like it must be a huge amount of maintenance of that sort of knowledge.
Um, we used to do it more. We used to have, for instance, everyone would be assigned a different element of Regency England. You know, someone would look at the food, and someone would look at the houses, and someone would think about transport, and we'd all have to swat up and do a little presentation for each other. Or, you know, we'd
Hmm.
have workshops that were specifically geared towards learning a Regency dance or ways of speaking. And the costumes are kind of procured at great expense by people who make authentic things. But I think the reality is that we're actually not kind of imitating Jane Austen's novels. We're kind of evoking what people know from Jane Austen adaptations, I would say. And
Oh
actually,
yeah.
important things are the look and the feel of it. Um, I think maybe some kind of Jane Austen acolytes come to the show and are disappointed that we're not referencing kind of obscure side characters or doing
Yeah.
nods to the novels. But the reality is that it's a show that kind of feels authentically Austenian in the sense of what that means in the public imagination, which really is more like, the Colin Firth Pride and Prejudice.
Yes.
So the important thing is the um, the sort of the social niceties and social rules, a slightly archaic way of speaking, the
Hmm.
uh, intricate love stories, and there are certain tropes of character, the the overbearing father or the flighty mother or the dark handsome stranger with a dodgy past. There are kind of things that keep popping up in her novels, and so you kind of weave them in. But really, I think it's only Austinian to the extent that um, people you kind of get a sense of the audience's disappointment if you break some of those rules.
That's really interesting.
Certain characters up to get together, and for whatever reason, the improv goes in a direction that the ending stuff sort of goes, I don't know, breaks that what people
Yeah.
lost in. You kind of feel this collective slight disappointment from the audience. But that said, as long as you're following those kind of basic tenets of what makes Austen in the public imagination, you can get away with almost anything. We've done shows with aliens, with zombies, with you know Vladimir Putin. As long as that sort of rough feel of it is there, the joy of it is that within that structure, well, I hesitate to say structure because there isn't really one, but within that, you can really do whatever you want, and that's really exciting.
That is absolutely incredible. It sounds like, yeah, an understanding of what the few rules that there are, I guess, so long as that they're observed. Anything else is possible. That's quite thrilling. I mean, I guess it's a similar way of thinking about writing comedy. You writing stand up, which you do just so amazingly well. I'm not just here to blow hot air up your ass, but like as a writer, you're phenomenal. You craft such amazing jokes. And do you enjoy having the luxury of time and thought when it comes to kind of crafting an hour of comedy, as opposed to that quick fire, just got to go with what feels right in the moment? Or is it just kind of folly to compare the two?
Um, I would say I don't enjoy it nearly as much. No, I think is the reality. You spoke
Oh,
earlier about thinking that improv is so much harder than stand-up because you don't have that time to work on it. I mean, I think the reality for me is I find stand-up infinitely harder
Oh,
and
wow.
of it. I think a lot of that comes from being a very what is the word? I don't have much self-belief, I think. And so with improv, whenever you say a joke, you've got, in the case of Austentatious, kind of 5, 6, 7, 800 people affirming that your joke was a good one.
Yeah.
Or if it wasn't, they'll, someone else will chip in and you have another go in a few seconds. Um, and so I think I just find that insecurity with stand up really hard, that you have to write on your own for ages and you just don't really know, and then you try it out but you can't quite tell, should you be trying it in a different way. And so
That's really interesting
yeah.
to hear. I mean, you clearly have found a way to make it work because you've done to date, is it 3 solo shows?
Yeah, I've done 3-hour shows in Edinburgh, yeah, at the Fringe, and then taken some of them on to other festivals as well.
Yeah. And what about, I mean, obviously, it's so difficult to predict if and when big festivals like Edinburgh or Melbourne or whatever may come back. But is the plan, for a fourth show anytime soon? Or are you kind of
Well,
just taking a little step back?
maybe you've been having the same feeling with this pandemic. There is a sense of like, oh, I'm a creative person stuck at home. I should be coming out of this with some masterpieces, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is, on the one hand, the pandemic should be a gift to creative people, but it's very difficult to deal with that pressure. And the reality is, I don't think I've written a single joke or funny thing since this, perhaps understandably. So, no, I think at the moment I'm not feeling like I'm gravitating towards that, but I'm very much looking forward to being able to do, yeah, improv live again. I mean, I feel very lucky that right before the pandemic hit, I was in Australia at Perth Fringe, so I got to in February, late February, I got to do that. I got to do improv and
Wow.
stand up under the glorious Australian sun. And then when my plane landed back home, uh, the apocalypse was happening. So at least I had,
Crikey. That is absolutely bonkers. But at least you had that experience. It must feel like a lifetime ago.
God, it does, yeah.
It's really mad the way this year's gone.
I can't
Um,
remember what the sun feels like, Connor.
but you remember what a fjord smells like,
I do.
and
All
that's the main thing.
smells
That's,
like herring. It smells like the murder of herring.
Daniel, there's so much about your kind of creativity and your comedy that I'm so interested in. Another thing that I love to ask people when they come on the podcast, I feel really lucky to speak to such kind of brilliant creative people, and I really find these conversations genuinely sort of educational for me. I learn so much from hearing about people's creativity. One aspect of their creativity that I really like to delve into are the kind of things that maybe aren't as sort of public knowledge, like things that, you are a filmmaker and a comedian, and you direct and you edit videos so brilliantly. But have you got any kind of hidden passions? Are we ever going to see a Daniel Nils Roberts novel, or a bronze sculpture, or a, an album? Do you do any other kind of interesting artistic things?
Ooh. I mean, I've sort of tried all of the creative things, I'll be honest. I think I'm just sort of defiantly giving them each a go, and in the hope that one will sort of definitely come off.
Have
Um,
you been trying anything recently, or
Whittling. I started whittling.
whittling? That's amazing.
I made a phone box out of a bit of wood, just like a little one.
That's incredible. Would you feel comfortable sending me a picture so that we can post it on the episode description?
If I've got one, I gave it to my brother because I didn't buy him a birthday present. Uh, And then my sister-in-law got married, and I felt so useless because they were getting married here where I'm staying on this sort of little old farm by the fjord, and
Mm,
all of her family were kind of chipping in and building. They basically built this barn, and I was just so
yeah.
useless. I'm crap at everything. So um, I made all these nice wedding signs to put around the property with my newfound whittling skills. But then I spent so long making these signs that I decided I'd had enough of whittling. So
Oh, it sounds like a kind of a summer love when you're a teen. It's intense, passionate, and then when it's done, it's totally done.
that's exactly what it was. It was like dirty dancing, and my Patrick Swayze was a little cheated on.
Whittling is a great one. We've definitely not had whittling before on the podcast.
I mean,
I feel
I'm,
like I
I'm
need to sort of put together an alternative creative directory. It's like, if you ever have any whittling needs, did you know that Austentatious' Daniel Nils Roberts does that? It's
there you go. Yeah, I mean, you say you haven't had any whittlers on. I wouldn't be surprised if after this pandemic, sort of 30% of the population have taken up whittling.
I
I think
know what I'm going to try this evening. I'm going to find an old bit of wood and just start hacking away at it. I'm sure that in the whittling community, just hacking away at it is probably not the common parlance, but
it's definitely what I was doing.
oh, Daniel, I'm so grateful that you've made the time to tell me today about your dream dinner party as well. I mean, I'm so excited. Your guest list is brilliant. Some names only one name I thought that person must surely be there. And there's definitely one that I just can't believe they are there. I can't wait to get to talk to you about each of them in person. Um, to start with, though, before we get into the specifics, what is a Daniel Nils Roberts dinner party like? Are you an enthusiastic dinner party host or attendee?
Um, n- uh, I'm not an enthusiastic host because again, coming back, this is another downer, but in sort of insecurity terms, I get too scared of the thought of inviting people over for dinner in case they don't want to come. And
Oh,
so I quite like the fact that in this scenario, I'm assuming kind of they're just there, right? I don't have to do a convoluted WhatsApp group to kind of persuade them.
this is your dream. If you happen to walk into a place and they're all there,
No, no,
then
I
that
don't,
is your dream.
because
Oh, okay.
then I won't feel like I belong. I'll walk right out. I'd be like, oh God, what all those important people there. Um,
Well, this is amazing. In your fantasy, then, how is it that this party comes into being?
good question. I
Perhaps
get,
you get invited by one of the others. Maybe they play host.
but then I'd be too insecure about my presence, wouldn't I? I'd be worrying like, why have I been invited here? I'd have definite imposter syndrome. Uh, I just need some reason that they all really wanted to come to my house. Um,
Oh, I don't think we have to be too fantastical about that. I mean, just post one of those pictures of your whittling and everyone will be flooding over there, surely.
well, let's say it's a whittling workshop where they've all signed up because they want to learn how to make a little phone box out of a hunk of wood.
I absolutely love that. That's brilliant. So, under the guise of a whittling workshop, they just happen to stick around for a meal afterwards.
Yeah, we all got on. I had some stuff in the oven.
This is great. Well, Daniel, of all the places in the world, I mean, it sounds like you're in paradise at the moment by your Norwegian fjord. I don't know if this is where you want to host it or if there's anywhere else in the world that you could get together this group of people. Where would you want to be?
Well, this is probably the kind of the feeling of having just been here hunkered down in the rain for a while makes me want somewhere warm. So
Yes.
I really miss traveling. I really love doing that, and having not been able to do it has been, bit bit difficult. I think I've probably suffered more than anyone else. No, I what I think I would like it to be is like an Italian vineyard, maybe
Oh,
overlooking
wow.
some water. Perhaps it's by a lake if that works. I don't know how vineyards work. and,
I can't see why that wouldn't work.
and so it would probably be kind of half outdoors. We could have one of those. What's it called? Where it's like a sort of trellis thing around us. It's like we're sort of outdoors, but on a. I don't need to go into the kind of the
I'm
B and
I'm loving this though. I just realized as you said it that trellis is a word that I know I've heard before, but suddenly panicked and thought, "What is a trellis?" So I've googled it,
yeah,
and
it's
now
the
I see
wrong
what you
word.
mean.
Well, no, it's the trellis is like something you grow plants on, isn't it?
Yes, it absolutely is.
I don't
Yeah.
really mean that. I mean just something bigger, almost a pagoda. Um,
Here we go again. A pagoda trellis, nonetheless, is a thing.
conservatory without the glass, but
I see what you mean. I'm picturing it. It's wonderful.
look, there'd be vines growing up the sides or something. We'd be looking out over the vines. There'd be some trickling water, maybe a fountain, lavender
Oh,
bush, I reckon. You
oh,
water off there. It would be early evening, I think, but still very warm.
this is heavenly.
That sounds
And
good.
these descriptive pyres, Daniel, this novel needs to happen. I'm right there. So we know where it will be. We know the time of evening. We know that there'll be the smell of lavender and the gentle trickle of water in the background. You'll have just finished a wonderful trellising workshop, and
Promising. I'm
your
not doing that,
first
am I?
well, your first workshop attendee slash dinner party guest, shall we say, is someone whose work you're hugely familiar with. Indeed, you're familiar with aspects of her work that even she wasn't familiar with. She was a novelist and the first woman ever to appear in a British banknote. You're of course inviting Jane Austen.
I am. I thought I probably had to.
Were you an Austen fan before you joined the group?
Yeah, I was. I think I'd read maybe two out of the whatever it is, five,
I th-
six.
yeah,
Uh,
I think six. Yeah.
plus, I'd done a little bit at university on her juvenilia, the kind of her younger works, which are quite fun.
Mm.
So yeah, I was a sort of passing fan. I mean, something I regret a bit is that I had a chance to do a big option on it at uni, and I chose to do Joseph Conrad instead, which was a bit rubbish.
Oh,
So
boo, Joseph.
I know he's definitely not coming to this dinner party. See Joseph
Oh
Conrad skulking around behind the trellis. Tell him
God,
to piss off into the lake.
definitely you've chosen a much more fun guest in Jane. I mean,
Conrad.
details of Jane's life are quite, there are kind of very few details for biographers to work with. So would you be hoping to like learn about some of those gaps in our knowledge about her life, or would you want to talk to her about her work? Or what do you think you would like to speak to her about?
I think you're right. I think I would like to get a sense of her life and her personality. Yeah, I don't have particular questions I'm dying to ask Jane Austen about the minutiae of
Sure.
her books or anything like that. Um,
Yeah.
I think like she wrote a lot of letters to her sister Cassandra, and um, almost all of them were destroyed after her death because her family didn't want the details to get out. Um,
Yeah.
so, but in the remnants of what remains, she did write about I was witty at this party, or like I went to this dinner party. She writes about a lot of parties and being entertaining and what she thought of other people. So I think it would be fun to kind of see her in full flow. Get a couple of glasses of Merlot down her and see it.
I did read that she was apparently very fond of dancing and would often kind of impromptuly start dancing at parties or dinner parties when it wasn't necessarily expected. So, do you think is that the kind of behavior you might expect from her?
That sounds good. Yeah, a bit of a live wire. I mean, I don't want the party to go weird to start with. Let's have a couple of. We'll do some whittling. We'll get through the first course. If she wants to dance a bit later, I think it would throw things if she's just immediately hopping up, wouldn't it?
That's true. If you go in at 100 miles an hour to start with, that's not ideal. Well, I mean, she was also quite sort of frank and outspoken. I mean, that was part of the reason why those letters were burned because family members didn't want Jane's kind of forthright comments on people being read. Would you have any concerns about her being a little bit too kind of frank and honest at the dinner party?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think that would be fun. You know, there'd be fun elements to that, the sort of sharp wit, wouldn't there? I think maybe I reckon everyone else at this party could probably take it. My worry is
True.
Jane Austen was quite frank, but she also judged people a lot on kind of manners and behaviour. I think
Oh
because
yeah.
there's somewhere else where she wrote in one of the letters that she doesn't like the Prince Regent. You know, the sort of famously kind of caddish Prince Regent there was at the time.
Hmm.
So he apparently had all her books in his shelf and everything, and was a big fan. But she kind of disapproved of him because he was a bit debauched. So
Interesting.
there's a chance that a couple of people on this guest list might catch her disapproval for that reason.
That I think that sounds like a very exciting thing to sort of watch and observe and see if you can detect who she doesn't approve of.
Yeah, that's true. I can be on the outside, can't I? I can sort of make the peace and see her through my vague knowledge of her life and works.
What do you think she would make of your shows? I'm sure you've been asked this before, but I'd be very interested to know, do you think she would enjoy an Ostentatious show?
Um, I mean, based on what we were talking about before, how much she judged people and the importance of manners and how carefully kind of calibrated her novels are, it's
Hmm.
maybe tempting to say that she would just think it was all rubbish. I think, her youth, her childhood was consumed with putting on little plays, mad little plays for her family. And her early writings, because she's got these sort of proto novels that she was scribbling together in her teens, which are collected now, are crazy. Like these images that we have in Jane Austen novels of everyone fainting all the time doesn't really happen in your Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility or whatever. If it does there, it's quite a serious thing. But in these early books, they're kind of taking the piss out of popular literature, and people just faint absurdly all over the place, and they're pretty wild. And I think there's something in the spirit of that juvenilia that she would um, feel the kind of kindred sense in Ostentatious. I think, I
I
hope that
think
she
so.
enjoyed the yeah, sort of unfettered lampooning that goes on.
I think it sounds to me like she would really enjoy it. Uh, I mean, she's just fascinating, and as you say, so funny. And obviously, I mean, I've read perhaps only Pride and Prejudice of her novels, but I've seen, a few more versions of things. Like I watched the most recent adaptation of Emma,
Mm,
which I just loved. But how did you feel about it?
um, I It was an interesting one. I kind of liked a lot of things about it. I like the kind of it had gone for the a similar kind of period feel to stuff like The Favourite. I thought, that sort of
Hmm. Yeah.
the inserting a bit of modern humour and of distinct visual style into it. So there was lots to enjoy. I thought it sold itself short on the emotional side for me, because I
That's
think that's what it
interesting.
does really well is balances the wit with emotion that lands, and I didn't feel like the emotion landed in that. I think they purposefully undercut it at several key moments. Um,
Oh, that's very interesting. Because one of my kind of enduring memories of it was when she's particularly rude to at the picnic.
that's
Um,
true. That bit does land. That works, yeah. But I
yeah.
suppose I was just thinking of the love story. I felt
Oh,
what
true. Yeah, I didn't really care about that.
no, what I described that you can sometimes feel in the audience at one of our shows if it doesn't quite feel like it ends in an Austen-y way. That was how I
Hmm.
felt when I was watching Emma.
Ah, interesting. Very interesting. Do you have a kind of particular favorite work of Austen's? Not just the sort of, film adaptation, but, of her writings. You speak about her juvenilia and that kind of thing. Is there a particular aspect of her work or even a kind of quality within it that you prize above any other?
Hmm. Um, I think it is it's almost a surprise every time you pick one up to be reminded of how kind of freshly mischievous and funny it is. I think there's a temptation with a book that old and set in that kind of dusty world to think, oh, the adaptations must be bringing that to it, you know.
Yeah.
I think it's a real delight every time to read it and just find how it does just skip along so humorously. But I think, like I was saying with the emotional heft, I think we shouldn't forget how incisive she can be about real human feelings and personalities. I think Persuasion is a good one for that. You know, it's a real sort of mature, um, sort of infused with longing, and I think
Mm.
she's capable of writing in powerful ways in that sense too. So we shouldn't write her off just as a humorist, I think.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, she's such a terrific choice for a first guest, and I think she sets a tone or a quality in an evening that I think would be a very good thing to carry throughout it. And your next guest is someone who's a bit of a legend. Their works explored some pretty big ideas such as religion, politics, isolation, depression, sexuality, loss, death, romantic relationships. He was a poet, a novelist, and he's considered to be one of the greatest singer-songwriters of his generation, or indeed of any other. You're inviting Canadian legend Leonard Cohen.
Yeah, I am. He was first on the list. He's got to come.
Oh wow, first on the list. Well, why is that? I mean, when did you first become a Cohen fan?
I think it was in my mid-teens, maybe, that I first started listening to Leonard Cohen. So I probably was sucked in by what people see as quintessentially Leonard Cohen-esque, which is the kind of I suppose he's seen as a miserablist, and so in my
Yeah.
that maybe attracted me, the sort of bleak beauty of his own angst. But
Yes, I guess as teenagers we're all guilty of thinking that the depth of our feeling has never been known in the history of humanity. And
exactly,
some of Cohen's work perhaps lends or leads into that a little bit.
it was either him or Morrissey, and I don't think we want him at our dinner party.
You've chosen well. He is, I mean, his work was quite dark. I mean, what do you think he would be like as a guest? Because he had a fascinating life where he's, lived in kind of a Buddhist monastery and that kind of thing. And he was hugely introspective throughout his life and obviously struggled with depression, but later in his life sort of seems to have come to a place where he said that he'd overcome his depression. So, have you got Leonard Cohen there from a particular point in his life, or?
Yes, I do, and I think that's quite important, maybe more so than it is with some of these other people. So I kind of, having developed this deep love for Leonard Cohen in my teens, I was lucky enough to go to one of his shows when he did
Oh
his first
wow!
tour coming back. I saw him twice in the end, but the most kind of fantastic was on this first tour back. I'm not quite sure what year it was. Maybe it was like, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in Birmingham, and so I want that Leonard Cohen. And the difference is, we've been talking about the dark side of Leonard Cohen, but the reality and what people often forget is he's really funny and really warm. And I feel very privileged to have seen him at that point, because I think there's often that sense with icons of music that you're like, oh, I wish I could have seen them when they were in their prime, when they were young.
Mm-hmm.
But when Leonard Cohen was, in the 70s or whatever, when he was touring, he was, like you say, he was depressed, but he was also really anxious, like horrible stage fright, hated doing
Mm-hmm.
the shows, looked really glum throughout the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that Leonard Cohen. I want the one who kind of just gave such a warm, wonderful, witty performance. It felt like, it felt like discovering you had a grandfather you didn't know about who was just the most charming,
Oh
well,
wow!
and it felt like he was just so grateful for everyone who'd come down. It felt like he was speaking to us individually, um, and just, yeah, joking and running and enjoying himself, and it just felt like this utter delight. So I want the late Leonard Cohen. I
That's
want the one
amazing. What an
found.
extraordinary quality in a performer to be able to make you feel that way.
Yeah, and there. I'm sure it's true of a lot of legends, but there would be people who just followed him on his entire tour and went to every show. Uh,
Yeah,
but there was just that real sense of, yeah, it felt like a gift from a performer in a way that I haven't experienced. Um,
that's amazing. Really, really incredible to hear about that. I mean, he's someone whose work I actually don't really know very well. But I obviously I know some of his kind of famous hits like Hallelujah, I'm Your Man, everybody knows, like, some of the really big ones. Do you have a kind of particular favorite piece of Cohen's work, be it his music or his poetry or his novels?
um, I think I appreciate all of it, and I appreciate the different qualities that he brings to different parts of it. You know, in the '80s, it goes very synthy and stuff like that. But I
Hmm.
definitely am most drawn to what I first fell for, which was the early acoustic albums. I think my favourite song is "Famous Blue Raincoat," which I just think is
That's such
so
a great title.
yeah. It's written. It's a sort of epistolary song, or however you say that word. So it's written as a letter, uh,
Yeah.
and it's just so rich. I think all of his work is so rich because, like you say, he had that background as a poet. You know, he didn't start releasing music until his early 30s, I think.
Hmm.
And so there's this sense that his the words feel so rich and open to kind of interpretation and full of emotion and personality and thought. And so there's so much to kind of dive into there, and I think that helps them connect with the listener. But yeah, "Famous Blue Raincoat" would be my favourite song. But also at my wedding, which was also here next to the fjord,
Oh, lovely.
we did a bit of a DIY wedding, and uh, I sort of thought my mum should do a little reading of something, and we couldn't decide what she should do. So um, on the day of the wedding, I just sort of printed out "Dance Me to the End of Love" by Leonard Cohen, and she read that as well. So
Oh, that is
it's
so lovely.
a connection to my wedding. That
Oh, that's
was actually written about the Holocaust, but you can kind of
it's adaptable. It's adaptable. Yeah. I mean, for someone like me who is interested in him but hasn't had that background of loving his work, would there be a kind of an entry point or a good entry point for someone like me that you would recommend?
um, yeah, I think literally it's his first album. I
So you kind of think start from the beginning and just work your way through.
Yeah, I think it's called Songs of Leonard Cohen. I think that was the first one. Yeah, it's at that point it's maybe more what we would associate with that kind of American folk scene, you know, like all your Bob Dylan
Dylan, and yeah.
and stuff. It's mostly just Leonard Cohen and a guitar. Yeah, later on he kind of embraces instrumentation that maybe isn't to every taste. You know, by the
Hmm.
end of his career, there's a bit of a kind of lounge feel to it. You know, he's got saxophones in there and a sort of female choir and stuff like that. And I don't love all of what's going on um, there in terms of the textures, but he also really embraces his wit and his sauciness and um,
Hmm.
rewards, I think, with the later music. And he died in that horrible year when everyone was dying.
Yes,
Uh,
of course.
and yeah, he felt like the one I was most upset about, even though he was old and it was his time, you know. But they
Yeah.
just a few weeks before they died, they released an album called "You Want It Darker," which was the first one I would say for a couple of decades that had instrumentation that sort of felt a bit more in keeping with what he'd originally been doing. So that's maybe another one to have a look at. And his voice gets lower and lower and lower with every passing year, you know. So by the end, it's just this kind of sub bass rumble that
It's
bears.
yeah. I mean, it's just this insane vocal quality that I mean, thank God he did have the creative mind that he had, because if he wasn't musically inclined and he'd had that voice, I can't think of a greater waste than to have not been a world renowned singer with that voice. It's a phenomenal voice. You mentioned his wit and sauciness, two great qualities in a dinner party guest. So, what do you think he's like at dinner? What do you think he would have been like as a guest?
Um, I think he would be. I think he's probably someone who liked holding court. I think he'd be flirting with Jane, no doubt. Uh, I think he'd be quaffing wine, but he'd also have so many stories. He's a bit of a philosopher, but
Mhm.
very funny. Like I said, with these shows in between, it was almost like watching a classic American stand-up. There's
Wow.
a lot of wit. Um, yeah, and quite rakish. Maybe he's one of the people that Jane Austen would disapprove of for his debauchery, like the Prince.
It's certainly an interesting clash, perhaps a culture clash there, but it would be fascinating to observe. I mean, is there anything in particular you would want to speak to him about or hear him talk about? A particular time in his life or his career that you just think you could never get bored of hearing about it, or do you kind of just want to bask in the presence of and the kind of persona of Leonard Cohen?
Yeah, I think that's it. I suppose there's a bit of the bit that I'm maybe curious about is this kind of he has this mythologized relationship with this Norwegian woman called Marianne,
Hmm.
which inspired one of his most famous songs, "So Long, Marianne." But so that was kind of billed as the love affair of his life. They kind of fell for each other on this Greek island, but then it wasn't to be for various reasons. But they were together for a few years in the 70s, I think.
Hmm.
And then when she died, he wrote her this email kind of saying, "My dear Marianne, I'll be joining you soon," or something. So there's this kind of, um,
Yeah, it broke my heart when I read about that earlier. It was so just beautiful words, but yeah, it really affected me actually. Um,
yeah, it's a lovely story. There's a documentary about it, which I haven't yet had a chance to see. But I suppose something like that, his finding the romance in him. But as you mentioned, I think a lot of his life was spent being depressed and being anxious and searching for answers. He tried out every religion under the sun,
mhm.
and
I
so I
read an amazing quotation from him in relation to what you just said about trying to find answers. He said after his experience in a Buddhist monastery, what happened to me was not that I got my answers, but that the questions dissolved. So at a certain point, he just stopped asking the questions and kind of found contentment in that.
yeah, I suppose that's what we all have to aim for, isn't it? I mean, I
Yeah,
think
it's quite something.
that's maybe another reason why I want old Leonard Cohen there is because I think there would be something kind of reassuring or comforting or something about having someone who it feels like has been through so much mentally, and yet here he is at my dinner party with this sense of
Yes.
satisfaction. He hasn't answered anything, like you say, but he's got his
Yeah.
skin fast.
He's there. He seems happy. He's got his little wooden telephone box. All is well.
He'd probably be a good whistler because Canadians, they're all chopping down trees
Of
all day.
course, yeah, they're born whittling, aren't they? Canadians. He's such a great choice, and I love hearing you talk with such kind of warmth and passion about his work. It really makes me want to go and explore more of his work. So I will be taking your advice and starting with the first album, and I will let you know how my Cohen journey goes.
Ah, excellent. I look forward to hearing about it.
Your next guest is a German filmmaker, author, and opera director. He's been described as the most important film director alive, and he seems like a real eccentric. You're inviting Werner Herzog.
Yeah, yeah, I am.
Now, why are you inviting him? He is fascinating, but I don't know if when I was reading about him, I thought he would be a relaxing person to have dinner with. So why have you chosen him?
Well, I think like Leonard Cohen, he's someone who I want at this stage in their life.
Mhm.
He's this really eccentric filmmaker, like you say. I love a lot of his films. He's worked both in fiction and documentary, and apparently opera. You say, and he's done some acting as well in this
Mhm.
mad range of varied projects. So I definitely have interest as someone who works in filmmaking as well in his unique kind of approach and his thoughts on filmmaking. But he's also, like Leonard Cohen, he's another philosopher, really. Um, he's just got this really unique perspective on the world, and he's also incredibly funny. It's this dry wit that maybe people don't see when they, read about the kind of films he makes or hear his distinctive voiceover narration. But he's an incredibly witty, sort of self-aware guy, I think. And yeah, I think he'd also, if you've watched any of his documentaries, he asks kind of totally counterintuitive questions, questions that wouldn't expect to come up. And I think that would help to get stuff out of the other people around the table. If I'm wanting to get to the bottom of Jane Austen, I want Werner Herzog there to kind of plumb the depths of her psyche. I watched clips recently of him, and he did this film about Antarctica. I can't remember the title of it, but he's interviewing this guy about penguins with the big flock of them behind. And, in any normal nature documentary, you can imagine the sorts of questions that would be asked. But his question is there such a thing as insanity among penguins? Because they've had enough of their colony, like, he's going to get some good stuff out of these other people.
That is brilliant. He, yeah, the key thing with him that seemed to be when I was reading, I was aware at a point that my jaw had dropped just reading about some of the mad things he said. I mean, his philosophy to documentary making. He said, "I prefer people who have worked as bouncers in a sex club or have been wardens in the lunatic asylum. You must live life in its very elementary forms." And I feel perhaps documentary making isn't for me because I've not had those opportunities. But as a filmmaker, has that philosophy of his, not necessarily the sex clubs and the lunatic asylums, but his philosophy toward filmmaking, is it something that directly inspires you or influences your work?
I don't think it is, because unfortunately what he describes is the polar opposite of the kind of person I am. He wants kind of, rebels and rule breakers with wild backstories. And I'm just not that. But I think he's inspired me in terms of his, for instance, his way of interviewing, or his the quirkiness he infuses his films with, probably particularly in the documentaries, I think.
Yeah, I've not seen any of his films. So what am I missing? Like, what sets his work apart? Is it that quirkiness?
Not necessarily. I guess there's quite different routes to approach it. Like, his early work was fiction films, probably kind of most famously following kind of, I suppose, fantasists surrounded by hostile nature. A lot of his work, he has these running themes of kind of how the world is kind of, I guess nature is hostile to man, and how do we face that, the wildness around us, kind of thing, which is pretty heavy. That's not quirky. So his early films, he worked a lot with this actor called Klaus Kinski, who was, I think, probably a psychopath. He was found afterwards to have spent years abusing his daughter, for instance. So
Oh
pretty
God,
dark.
okay.
But Werner Herzog saw in him this kind of primal quality, and would just wind him up on set, to the point where Klaus Kinski would just scream and shout for hours. He once shot a gun at Werner Herzog, like,
Oh my
absolutely.
God.
And when he was at this sort of peak rage, Herzog would sort of roll the camera and shoot the scene, because he captured something that Herzog, I guess it comes back to what you were talking about with what he wanted in filmmakers. He's sort of after some kind of primal truth that you don't get.
That's extraordinary.
So yeah, I guess his fiction starts like that, but his documentaries are probably more famously notable for his narration and his presence in them. So they become
Okay.
all, no matter the topic, they sort of take on the role of his own philosophical piece. He did one about the cave paintings in the Ardèche Gorge in France, and he's making all these connections in his narration with what the paintings tell us about the formation of the human, soul and characteristics and art and all these things. So on the one hand, it's
Wow.
a film about that, or on the one hand, Grizzly Man is a film about this guy in Alaska who goes to live with bears to his own, demise. But he always
Crikey.
gives them these unique twist of Werner Herzog's kind of perspective on the world.
That sounds extraordinary and really unlike anything else I've ever kind of heard of. I read a thing that happened to him in 2006. He was doing an interview with Mark Kermode, and he was shot in the abdomen mid-interview and proceeded to finish the interview without seeking medical treatment. I mean, what do you think would have to happen before Herzog would kind of excuse himself from the table?
Well, that's a good question. There's this brilliant little clip. Someone's just filmed it on their phone, I think, when they're driving with him. I don't know what the context was, but the person asks him, "What languages do you speak?" And Werner Herzog goes like, "Oh, not many. English, German, Italian, French, Greek, ancient Greek, Latin. Just a few." But then he says that he speaks French, but he hates using it. He's like, "It's disgusting. I hate it. You had to hold me at gunpoint in order to get me to speak French. In fact, I was in Africa, and I was surrounded by these child soldiers, all drugged, and they were pointing guns at me. Very dangerous situation. And I was trying to explain to them, and they were saying, parlez peu français," or whatever, only French, only French. And so eventually I had to explain to them in French where I was going, and they let me go. But I still regret speaking it.
That is amazing.
I think he's staying at the dinner table no matter what, isn't he?
Unless you start speaking French.
That's true.
Oh my goodness, he's absolutely incredible. I mean, it really interests me, Daniel, that you've chosen such an extreme personality as his when you kind of self-identify as someone that's so very different to him. Do you wish you were a bit more Herzog, or are you quite glad to be sort of further away from that end of the spectrum where he does seem to balance a fine line between eccentric and quite mad?
Well, I think the reason that I'm still happy to have him at my dinner party is because I think he is still a very warm and calm presence. He again, I went to a talk by him in London a couple of years ago, which was just this incredible look at his life and his work and his philosophy. And he radiates warmth and kindness and gentleness, despite all of what he has been willing to do in the name of his art. So I think he's someone who, yeah, I definitely do wish I had more of those characteristics. Just that kind of bravery to pursue your creative vision to the point where you're able to, put yourself
To
through that. I certainly
an
don't have.
almost sort of illogical end that he gets
Yeah,
to with
I
it,
mean,
I suppose.
I read another thing actually a while back about. I was talking about how he worked with his actor Klaus Kinski, who would
Mhm.
rage, shout, and rant, and Herzog says that every time Kinski went into one of these rages, these native Indian guides they had because they were filming in Peru in the Amazon would all cower in a huddle in terror. And this would happen throughout the shoot. And then apparently at the end, when the film had wrapped, he was told by someone that they weren't actually scared of the man who was ranting and raving. They were scared of the man who could be so still and quiet.
Why? That's mad.
So
That's
I
so
would like a bit
interesting.
more of that. I would like the ability to not care about what people think and to withstand confrontation, which I'm very, very bad at.
Oh,
Um,
me too.
yeah.
Dreadful. Absolutely dreadful at it. I get the sense as well that Herzog is someone who wouldn't be particularly fussy about the menu. I mean, this is a man, after all, who ate his shoe to live up to a bet he had with Errol Morris. An
He-
extraordinary story. Have you seen the documentary about that?
I have. It's very funny. I love how dry and sort of po-faced all his humor is, because that's undoubtedly a humorous thing, but he plays it so straight.
what was it? He boiled the shoe for 5 hours in kind of garlic and
It's
stock.
a while since I've seen it.
I think it was like chicken stock and garlic and herbs. And he boiled the shoe for 5 hours and ate the top part but didn't eat the sole. But his defense for that was you don't eat the bones of the chicken, uh, which is really quite something.
There you
So I
go.
think you can be relatively confident that no matter what you put down in front of him, at least he's going to eat it.
That's good. He'll sort of be the antidote to Jane Austen, who's probably complaining about every course.
He is another just wonderful personality to add into the mix. And your next guest is a multi-instrumentalist, a singer-songwriter, and an actress. She's appeared in Inherent Vice, The Muppets, and Popstar Never Stop Never Stopping. You've got Joanna Newsom coming to your dinner party.
I do, yeah.
Now, she's someone who I honestly had never heard of until you sent her over as, a part of your guest list. So I checked out some of her music today, and she's got such an unusual voice. When did you become a fan of hers?
I think that was probably in late teens or something. That was maybe when she started releasing records. So it's probably maybe 2003 or four was
Mm-hmm.
her date. I'm not sure of the exact year. Maybe two, three, four, somewhere like that.
Sure.
But yeah, I think she's an interesting one where I would say don't start at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Her first record is by far the most difficult one to warm to. I believe there was a contemporary review at the time that described her as a duck-voiced bint, which,
As insults go, that's pretty great.
yeah, I'm not sure bint would get by the sort of 2020 language.
Perhaps not, yeah.
Yeah,
But
so
wow, duck voiced. I mean, it's certainly an unusual voice. How would you describe it?
um, well, on that album, it's almost cartoonish. It's got this sort of naive, high-pitched quality. But she sort of tempers that in her later work. For me, um, so she has four kind of studio albums, and it's her second one that is the kind of just stunning wow piece for me, which is called Is. Is. I don't. The pronunciation is unclear, but just YS.
Oh,
Um,
yes, okay.
some archaic word. I don't know what it means, but that's just five extended songs. Basically, Joanna Newsom's a harpist, so
Hmm.
um, they're backed by these incredibly soaring, textured harp uh, accompaniments, and in that album also orchestration from this guy called Van Dyke Parks, who was kind of the Beach Boys' go-to guy for orchestral stuff. Um, but yeah, her voice kind of is this incredible, sweeping, occasionally shrieking, very emotive and evocative tool, I suppose. But on that
Mm.
first album, I think sort of Alvin and the Chipmunks was probably evoked as well.
It's. I listened, and I'm not, to be honest, I'm not sure what album. I kind of heard a few tracks off YouTube, but there was something very kind of dreamlike about her music. Like, what does her music make you feel? Like, why does it appeal to you, and how
Mm,
does it affect you?
yeah, I think dreamlike is probably a good word. She's someone who probably appeals to the English language student in me in that she has very dense lyrics, like Leonard Cohen. I think um, he's less dense, but still kind of elliptical. Often you don't necessarily know what someone is singing about, and she takes that to an extreme. You know, she uses this vast vocabulary that might seem like she's just kind of trawling through a dictionary to be um, contrary and sound impressive, like a sort of
Hmm.
Russell Brand with a harp. You know, but I think what it does is create this just incredibly rich world of um, imagery and emotion. And I think the fact that she is tying together all of these references you might not understand and using all these words you might not know isn't actually to the detriment of feeling. Because I think, yeah, I would suggest as maybe as an opening point, the first song on that East album, which is called Emily, which is sort of a song to her sister, who's an astronomer.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes in all these wild and diverse poetic detours. But I think she's just able to combine melody and instrumentation and that unique voice and such an unusual choice of words in such a way that just somehow is so incredibly beautiful to me. And yeah, I think I just can't listen to some of her music without feeling this kind of your heart soaring and a tear forming in the corner of your eye or whatever. There's that
Wow.
power every time for me, I think.
That's really extraordinary. And again, like you described earlier with Leonard Cohen and how he was able to affect such a strong depth of feeling in you, it's surely just one of the greatest compliments you can pay any artist to say that they've affected you in such a way. The LA Times wrote of her work, Newsom uses the songwriter's default mode to explore how traditional love for women can be both the beginning and the end of possibility, a way to escape home and be exiled from it, to welcome children or be burdened by fertility, to be entrusted with secrets or betrayed. And that is deep. My question relating to that was going to be that she sounds like she would be a kind of kindred spirit of Leonard Cohen, and I didn't know if I was manufacturing that, but you sort of did make that comparison between the two yourself. Do you think in part you're drawn to her music because there is a kind of Cohen-esque element to it?
Um, I mean, I should stress I've chosen two sort of quintessentially folk singers here, I suppose, and that's not by any means the genre that I listen to the most. A lot of the time I'm listening to electronica or something, but
Mm.
they were certainly the people who kind of shone through in their music as people that I want to spend time with. I think that is the unique quality in both of their music. There's something so poetic and beautiful and profound, but also very kind of humanist, I think. There's something
Hmm.
of themselves that makes you want to, um, yeah, somehow tap into that.
And so,
Um,
what is it that you hear in her music that you kind of get a sense of her as a person? Like, what do you think she would be like to be around?
well, I think she's actually from sort of seeing some interviews with her and things like that and reading about her. I think she's probably um, similarly to Leonard Cohen, actually quite a witty and laid back person. I think she'd be a lot of fun.
Hmm.
She's actually married to the comedian Andy Samberg, who you might know from that.
Yes, of course. Yes, Saturday Night Live and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and
Yeah. So she's obviously got an interesting comedy, which is going to give us some talking points. But she's very
yeah.
funny. She went to a Steiner school, which I did as well. Um,
Ah, what is a Steiner school? This is something I don't know about.
how long have you got, Connor? They're they're basically it's a kind of school which is based on a sort of foundational ideology that was cooked up 100 years ago or something that has spiritual elements to it. But the reason they kind of are prevalent maybe in the modern world today are because they offer a slightly more kind of creativity and individual focused mode of learning than um,
That sounds wonderful.
so there are elements to it that are wonderful and there are elements to it that are quite bad. The one I went to was not great.
Hmm.
And they've been embroiled in some scandals lately. And
Oh
I
dear.
didn't know this until recently, but the spiritual element actually sounds pretty unpleasant. Some of it, it's there's some kind of reincarnation thing where you are being punished for a bit like what Glenn Hoddle was fired for, being punished for past mistakes in past lives if you're reincarnated as I don't know, you know So there's certainly some dodgy elements to it, but the nice side of it is that you sort of learn a bit, you start a bit later and have a much more creative focus, and in theory,
Hmm.
are encouraged more in those pursuits.
Oh, that's certainly a foundation there for something to talk to her about. I mean, would you want to talk to her about the kind of the real craft of her work, and or would you want to speak to her about her lyrics or her vocal quality, or sort of something completely different? You, as you say, she's clearly got an interest in comedy. She's a very multi-talented person. She's also an actor. She's appeared in Hollywood movies. So yeah, like what kind of common ground topics do you think you'd want to cover?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to her about working with Paul Thomas Anderson, who she did. She's the narrator figure in Inherent Vice, which is a film I
Hmm.
really like. A great filmmaker. Um, I don't think I don't know if I want to bore down into the lyrics or her process. I just
Mm,
like to hang out. Maybe she can write a song over the course of the evening. She can weave us all in with lots of flowery
I
allusions
like that.
right at the end.
I like that a lot. That would be quite something. And do you know, your final guest might even be able to play along. For this person is an amateur percussionist. Uh, Certainly, for me, your most surprising choice of the evening. He's a former footballer who was capped 4 times by England. He's now a TV pundit and a presenter, hosting BBC One's Homes Under the Hammer. You're inviting centre back turned centre forward, Dion Dublin.
I am, yeah. Is that all right?
I think it's wonderful. Now, I have some working theories. Either you're a hardcore Homes Under a Hammer fan, or you possibly support Coventry, or Villa, or Norwich, or Cambridge.
One of the first two is correct.
Coventry or Villa. It's
No, no,
it's
Coventry
got
or
to be
Homes
Villa, I suppose.
it was Coventry or Homes Under the Hammer, Connor.
Oh no! So definitely not Villa.
Definitely not Villa.
Let's go with Coventry. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
I
Well, my thought
see.
process for this was at first I was thinking about who are the icons that I would love to meet, and Michael Palin definitely came to mind. As
Yes.
Monty Python were like my biggest comedy influence, and he's obviously the nicest man in the world. But then
Yeah.
I thought to myself, if this was Desert Island Discs, where you always have Shakespeare and the Bible, Michael Palin's just there, right?
I see. So,
Palin and Attenborough, they're just in the corner.
as a kind of default baseline, can't have a dream dinner party without Palin and Attenborough.
Yeah. I mean, I
See.
don't mind that much about Attenborough, I'll be honest, but Palin. Sorry, I just got your podcast cancelled by saying that. But maybe Palin's like he's serving. He's the
I
waiter.
like that. I think
He,
he would have a lot of fun as the waiter at this dinner party.
yeah, he could be. He's played a lot of waiter type figures, hasn't he, in Python sketch?
Absolutely. He's the
So
proper
anyway,
gentleman's gentleman. All right,
and I
we're definitely going to allow this only because of the sheer cheek of the suggestion. Palin is there as guest waiter for the evening, but you've chosen Dion Dublin. So
yeah,
I'm assuming he was part of the Coventry team that you grew up admiring. Is that why you've chosen him?
yeah. I fell hard for football in the mid 90s, I suppose, sort of 95, 96, and
Yeah.
he was the star of the Coventry team that so delighted me. And yeah, just he was an incredible player at the time. He was my hero, and he seems to have just grown to be a really nice, kind, fun guy who I think it would be nice to have around. Palin, if I
Yeah.
had him, he's dragging the sort of average age quite high, isn't he? Um,
Wow, adding Dion Dublin in for a splash of youth. That says a lot about your evening.
Jane Austen, she died at like 40. She's.
That's true, yeah. Oh, so your average age. Really, it's just Leonard Cohen and Werner Herzog bringing it up there. The rest of
Yeah,
them, it's very young and cool party. I mean, Dion Dublin, he was obviously a great footballer. I mean, you don't get capped 4 times by England. He was joint top goal scorer in, I believe it was 97, 98.
what
Um, He's won the Premier League, of course, with Man United. So, he's achieved stuff, but he's not exactly a Messi or Ronaldo figure. What is it about Dion Dublin that you so warmed to?
Well, I think it was that sense of first getting into football and supporting a team that was not good. I supported them because my dad grew up in Coventry, so I wasn't living in Coventry at the time. So
Okay.
my exposure to them was, I would be cutting out. I found it the other day, like I had a scrapbook where I just cut out every newspaper or magazine article that mentioned Coventry, the match reports or like
Yeah.
a little write up in Match magazine or Shoot or whatever.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
assembled this. And he represented this kind of figure that was able to break out of that kind of lowly state of what the club was, because they'd won the FA Cup once. That was before when I was a baby, I think. So no chance of ever winning anything. Battled relegation every year, but suddenly, like you say, he was joint top scorer in the league. He got a cap for England while he was at Coventry. Like he was, I mean, to my whatever it was 10-year-old perception of football was just a superstar. This was like incredible that someone this good could be at a club that I followed. I've got another reason for wanting him along, which is that I got to meet him because I grew up in Scotland, actually, as you can hear from my Aberdonian lilt. Uh, and so me and my dad would, whenever Coventry came anywhere near, we would see that as an excuse to make a long road trip to go and watch them. So
Yeah.
I saw Coventry play a friendly against Hibs in Edinburgh.
Oh
Um,
wow.
saw them play in Newcastle because that was closer, and
Yes.
I got to go to Inverness to see them play Inverness Cally Thistle, I think it was. And
Wow.
these friendlies, I hung around afterwards. I think it was the Hibs one, waiting in case a player would come out and I could get their autograph or stare at them or whatever. And then the crowd parted, and coming through the throng, there he was, my radiant hero, Dean Dublin. And there were a handful of us waiting there, little kids, with our autograph books or whatever. And Dean Dublin kind of floats across in all his majesty, just grinning from ear to ear like he's so wonderful at. One of the other kids thrust their notebook up to him, and he ushered them aside and said, "Ladies first," and he came to me.
That is an amazing story.
Yeah. And
Oh
so,
wow. Chivalry's not dead.
yeah, but my little heart kind of at once soared and broke because
Oh.
I had, I had hair, unruly longer hair, and at the age of it, the thought that your hero thinks you're a girl is, like, yeah,
Oh, that is. I mean, there's the first thing that you got to talk to him about.
I
Uh,
know.
he does just seem like such a lovely guy as well. I mean, like recently he was in the news for trying to raise money for ex-professionals who have lasting effects from injuries. Like, he just seems like he's got a really good heart. I mean, what qualities do you think he'd be bringing along to the dinner party?
I think he would just be kind and quick to laugh and fun. He'd keep the conversation flowing. He'd stop anyone from arguing.
True.
He'd
Yeah.
crack out his saxophone and a little duet with Cohen and Newsom. Um,
The musical trio that none of us knew we needed.
and yeah, I think he'd have some good stories, some fun reflections on football. I
Yeah, I mean, you don't share a dressing room with Eric Cantona and not come out with some stories.
There you go, yeah. And he's like you alluded to earlier. He invented the doob, which
The
is his good.
Doob, which he's played with Ocean Colour Scene, so he's got some talent.
Well, there you go. That's the Leonard Cohen of.
The Doob, tell us about the Doob for people who don't know what the Doob is.
I'm not sure I know what the doob is. quite sure Dean Dublin knows what the doob is, but it, it's a percussion cube. Is that it? Is there more to it than that?
I'm afraid this is a new one on me. I skipped all my doob lessons as a kid and never really got the grinding in it that I should have done.
I need to look more into it, but from memory, it's a. Is it called a cajon? Those drums that you sit on?
I believe so. Yes.
It's like a cajon, but it's square and it's called the doob.
Good on him. He's invented an instrument. There aren't too many of us that can say that.
Yeah, but at this point, I'm struggling to think of what makes it distinct from other other than the name. But
you think perhaps that cajon in Google Translate, just in English, translates as doob?
it could be, couldn't it? Yeah. But he definitely was billing it as an incredible new discovery that was going to change the face of music. That might be bad. Maybe he's going to spend the whole meal just trying to sell the idea of doobs to Joanna Newsom.
Oh, you know that either she or Leonard Cohen would absolutely include it in a track and an album.
Yeah. Well,
And then,
fine. Yeah.
then suddenly it'd be the biggest and best instrument in the world. There's a clear path to doob domination here.
But I don't think he would be pushy. He seems like a nice guy who'd know when it was the moment to talk about the doob and when to let it lie.
I mean, he's a really good talker, which might sound really condescending and patronizing, but it's not something you can say for every footballer. Like, he is a really good pundit and presenter.
Yeah, I think he is, isn't he? And he seems very kind of self-aware and witty, but I don't think he's different from Leonard Cohen and Werner Herzog. He's not I don't think he's a philosopher. He seems like someone who's quite happy with his lot in life and just enjoys it as it comes. But that might be quite valuable at the table.
Certainly, I think so.
Jane Austen maybe would sit better with him, wouldn't she? Like those other guys are. They're in an Austen novel. I think Leonard Cohen and Werner Herzog are the kind of rakish military man who sweeps one of the younger sisters off their feet.
Of course,
they're characters to be idolized. Whereas Ian Dublin, I think, could be the kindly kind of parson or something who.
I am now just waiting to hear about the Austentatious performance where Daniel Nils Roberts plays Dion Dublin in a lost Jane Austen novel. That is quite something.
We've had a few that are based on football, and it's the most infuriating experience because no one else in the cast knows anything about it. 2 hours of me being infuriated as they make mangled references to sort of Michael Owen and the offside rule.
That's so funny. Daniel, one thing I was wondering was that if you're a wonderful documentary filmmaker, I really enjoy watching your films. If you were to make a film with Dion Dublin, say he's come for the whittling workshop, he's stayed for dinner, you guys hit it off, and you want to make a little documentary film with him, what do you think that would be about, and how do you think that process would go?
Oh, this is I'm feeling slightly frustrated by this hypothetical because of all the people around the table, he's the one I least want to make a documentary with. So
I've not offered you the chance to do it with Leonard Cohen or Werner Herzog.
Why did one of the others want this?
But Dion Dublin, he's available. He's got BBC TV experience. He'll do very nicely.
I'm trying to think. I'm sure there'd be plenty of worthy things that might be useful, but I suppose it would just have to be about Coventry, the football club. Try and whip up some enthusiasm for them. Like I was reading about how, there's that Sunderland Till I Die series. I think it's on Netflix or
yes,
Amazon.
it is. Yeah,
and apparently they've got fans now in weird countries all around the world just because people saw the series and I suppose felt sorry for them.
Yeah.
So it would be nice. Maybe my collaboration with Dion Dublin can kind of help to kickstart a renaissance for Coventry and.
Absolutely. Finally, shirt sales in Japan will spike.
Exactly, yeah. Coventry have got quite sort of poisonous owners. They're one of the clubs beset by
oh no,
crap people who won't get out. So maybe if we make a really good film we can sort of hawk that to the US or something, and one of the millionaires can come and buy Cov, and it'll be Sky Blues back in the Prem.
That would be quite something. That would be a documentary series that I would watch. And it would have all started at this wonderful dinner with Jane Austen and Leonard Cohen, Werner Herzog, Joanna Newsom, and Dion Dublin in this beautiful Italian vineyard
Oh yeah,
after a little whittling workshop. I mean, it sounds wonderful.
yeah.
One thing I like to ask about guests is, and I think it might be a little easier perhaps with the first four. Dion Dublin's definitely a bit of a curveball, but maybe I'm wrong, and I don't want to preempt your answer. But is there a common thread, do you think, that goes through all those guests? Is there a quality or anything that you think runs through each of them that you could say they are all of this?
Mm. Um, I think what's attracted me to all of them is a sort of, I think there's a humanist quality or something, a sense of that they are attuned to the feelings of other people in a witty way. Um,
Hmm.
something that might be contrived because let's be honest, they really run the gamut of.
No,
um,
I see it. I see it as well. I mean, definitely that vein of humor, I think, definitely goes through all of them. Perhaps even a sort of an unexpected vein of humor, because you don't immediately associate Leonard Cohen or Werner Herzog with being funny. But I think you've clearly and very eloquently explained how they are that.
yeah,
Um,
that's a much better link. Let's go with that. Kind of, they're all unexpectedly humorous.
you set it up. I just knocked it out of the park. That's it. Well, Daniel, the last thing that we need to find out is what the menu would be for this dinner party. I know this is something you've given a huge amount of thought to.
Yeah. That's your way of revealing I have put no thought in at all because
I
I,
just wanted to see what the improviser would do. Would you yes and it, or would you say no? I really haven't given this any thought.
I'm rusty. I've been sitting on the bank of this fjord. Um, well, one thing's for sure is that Jane Austen isn't getting let near any of the cooking because they ate awful food at that time. You know, it's all
Oh
weird,
yeah.
weird salty jellied meat and stuff.
Oh god.
Uh, so I think the starter, because we are. Sorry, I haven't asked about the format of this. Is it multi-course?
It can be whatever you think would be a good idea to serve up for your guests. The only proviso is that ideally you'd be preparing it.
Oh,
Uh,
right.
so yeah, whatever you like to cook,
That's thrown
really.
a spanner in the works then.
It can be anything you want, though.
We'll go Italian because, we're on the banks of this Italian lake by the vineyard. So
Absolutely.
I was going to say a starter of mussels, but I've never cooked them before. So we'll have a nice light carbonara, which I've got quite
Oh,
good cooking by the Jamie Oliver recipe. You sort of rub the pan with garlic first. It's quite efficient.
oh,
Um,
excellent.
so I think I'm quite good at that carbonara. I'll pop a bit of that out. And Italians eat that as a starter anyway. They don't see that as a main meal. Then
Brilliant.
um, the main, I think we'll just continue on the Italian theme and we'll just have a really good Italian pizza. You know,
Oh, yes.
it's simple, doesn't need any weird toppings or anything, just some basil and mozzarella on there. Um,
Wonderful. Are you an enthusiastic pizza chef? Do you like to make pizza?
yeah, definitely. I think I sort of was making a lot of stuff like that, and then I sort of decided I wanted to lose some weight, and I started just cooking much healthier things than pizza.
Hmm.
So I did it for a little while, but yeah, I definitely. I sort of. I don't think I ever got it right, but I suppose you need the right oven, and
True.
in this vineyard we've got the right oven, and Palin will be
Of
there stoking
course.
it out. So
How could I forget? Of course.
yeah,
Excellent. So lovely wood fired or stone baked Italian pizzas.
both I reckon. Yeah.
Brilliant. And
Uh, and then the dessert, a chocolate fondant
oh,
with vanilla ice cream. Keep it simple.
oh.
Maybe a bit of raspberry coulis on the side.
Oh my goodness. I have chosen the wrong time to have this conversation with you because it's pre-dinner for me.
Oh yeah,
And oh, that just sounds wonderful. I'm now very disappointed with what I've got coming up for my dinner.
I'd say.
That is an extraordinary evening, Daniel. I always feel very guilty at the end of this because I can't actually make this happen.
Mm.
Uh, but I'm so grateful that you've given it so much thought, and I've really enjoyed learning more about these guests, these brilliant, interesting, creative, funny, weird people. And certainly, I'll be going away and delving a little deeper into some of their work. I know I'm gonna have to go away and read Persuasion and listen to Leonard Cohen from the beginning and watch some Werner Herzog and check out Joanna Newsom's music in reverse.
Oh,
And even just to finish it all off, I'll watch an episode of Homes Under the Hammer. Or maybe I should go back and just watch a kind of a highlight reel from the 97-98 season of Dion Dublin.
yeah, that's what you want to do. Forget Homes Under the Hammer. Go back to that beautiful season when he was up front alongside Darren Huckabee, and the two of them were just banging them in.
That sounds so great. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me on the dinner party. If our lovely listeners want to check out more of your brilliant work or find out when Austentatious are performing or check out any of your films, how can they do that?
Well, I've got a website which is at the moment more for film related things because all the comedy work has died a bit of a death for obvious reasons, but that's danielroberts.com. Ostentatious do have a West End residency planned for next year, so you can actually buy tickets for that. That
Oh,
starts,
exciting.
in theory, is kind of once or twice a week right up until the summer, in the Fortune Theatre off Covent Garden, which is where The Woman in Black is. But, well, I shouldn't say a but, should I? I should just say go and buy tickets for that. But as we all know, it may be cancelled like this year's one was.
Sure.
And I don't know if I'm allowed to reveal it yet, but it's looking like we'll have another Christmas special on Radio 4. So keen
That
listeners.
is very, very exciting. That is amazing news. Very exciting. Daniel, it's been such a pleasure chatting to you this evening. Thank you so, so much, mate, for taking the time. And enjoy that beautiful fjord. And when you're back in the UK, it'll be really great to catch up.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks very much for having me. And of course,
Cheers.
you're welcome at the dinner too. Palin will
Ah,
pull up the chair.
I'll be Palin's underling. I'll do all the things he doesn't want to do. Thanks, Daniel. Oh, I really loved that. What a really top group of guests Daniel put together. And I, for one, would love a ticket to that whittling workshop in an Italian vineyard. I particularly love it on this podcast when someone chooses a guest that I read about and immediately want to know more. And having really never taken the time to engage with the work of Leonard Cohen, I know this is going to be the beginning of my relationship with his work. So huge thanks to Daniel for that. Daniel is such a talented guy, and as you've heard in this episode, he's also ridiculously humble. Honestly, if you ever get the chance to see Daniel live, either as part of Austentatious or as a stand-up, he is just so incredible, so do check him out. We've added links into the episode description for Daniel's website and social media accounts, so do check those out. And the films on his website, they're just so great. You got to check those out. They're really well worth a watch. This is just another brilliant conversation from a series which, honestly, I just couldn't love any more than I do. I'd love for as many people as possible to be able to hear these conversations. So if you like the series, please do review us, give us a rating, share it with friends. Whatever you can do to get more listeners would be invaluable. We'd really appreciate it. The Dinner Party's a Jericho comedy production. For more info on all things Jericho comedy, visit www.jerichocomedy.com or follow us on Twitter at Comedy Jericho. And for any more info on my radio, podcast, comedy, or writing work, you can visit www.connormcreynolds.com. I'll be back next week chatting to another fantastic guest all about their dream dinner party. But until then, thank you so much for listening, and bye-bye.